When I played the first 4 Silent Hill games, I went down about 1,000 different rabbit holes trying to understand the lore behind this game. And while I do agree with the sentiment that a lot of people have that Silent Hill 2 is one of the most fantastic psychological horror games, it does still end up leaving a lot of questions hanging in the air. The ambiguity actually is really beneficial to the liminality that is central to the game. It adds to the vibes, if you will. And in my opinion, actually makes the horror all that more disturbing because, and I don't mean this sarcastically, but what is scarier than the unknown? Something I do know is that Silent Hill has a lot of focus on religion. Not only the syncretic religion that exists within the Silent Hill universe, but it also has just a lot of themes that come from various mythologies. What I want to do today, though, is actually make a case for a completely different myth that is one of the most interesting, kind of weird interpretations that can be applied to Silent Hill 2. And it's one you probably haven't heard of unless you're a mythology buff or really into history. What we're talking about today is the myth of Cybele and Attis. I believe that's how it's pronounced. I've seen a couple different translations and spellings of this name. She is an Anatolian mother goddess best known for her tragic love for the mortal shepherd Attis. She is known as the Magna Mater Cubalea, or also possibly Mountain Mother. She personifies the earth and rules over fertility, nature, wild animals, and mountains. Greeks identified her with their own mother of the gods, the Titaness Rhea, and she has also been partially associated with the harvest mother goddess Demeter and earth goddess Gaia. Sometimes her story is used to identify the seasons or put an explanation for them, which I think is why she is partially associated with Demeter. This isn't a dark romance genre inspiring story about the god of the underworld. It's actually a story of self-mutilation and regeneration, one that involves her consort, a man I mentioned before named Attis. I've seen multiple versions of this story around, so I'm going to start with some of the less common ones that I had seen, and then end on the one that I had seen in the most sources. In one interpretation, a handsome priest named Attis tries to escape a lustful pursuit of a king in the forest. The king catches him, and in their struggle they emasculate each other, and the king dies immediately. Attis, however, has time for Cybele's priests to find him. The goddess cannot bring him back to life at this point, but she orders elaborate funeral rites and commands all of her priests to become eunuchs in his honor. In Ovid's version, Cybele asks her devoted acolyte Attis to guard her temple and remain chaste for ritual purity. He agrees, but he later falls in love, and Cybele discovers this. She then destroys his lover, and consumed by guilt, Attis castrates himself, and Cybele transforms him into a fir tree. Now, for the most popular and also the weirdest version of this myth that I had seen, though a lot of mythology can probably be described as weird, the god Zeus desires Cybele, but she does not want to be with him, so she rejects him. Zeus, historically, doesn't really like being told no. So while she sleeps, he spills his seed on the earth, but also on her, which results in a child being born called Agistus. The child actually ends up being a hermaphroditic child, so powerful that they are feared by the gods. As a result of this fear, the gods decide to cut off their male member. From the blood that falls to the ground, vegetation grows. And in some versions of this myth, an almond tree does. So there is a river nymph that then eats an almond, becomes pregnant again, and then gives birth to another child. This child is Attis, and Attis grows up to be very handsome. Cybele actually ends up falling in love with him. Attis, however, is in love with the daughter of a king and plans on marrying her. But out of jealousy, Cybele drives Attis mad during the wedding. In his frenzy, he castrates himself and dies. Filled with regret, Cybele asks Zeus to then preserve Attis's body. Zeus agrees, allowing his body to remain uncorrupted, but he can't return to life. Blood that spills from Attis's castration and wounds also springs to life more vegetation, specifically violets, I believe, also the fir tree again. It depends on the myth. In all of these, though, we can make out a pattern where Cybele becomes attached to the shepherd Attis. Attis breaks his vows somehow, sometimes through infidelity. He's driven mad by divine forces, and in that frenzy, he castrates himself and dies. Cybele is filled with regret, preserves his body so it does not decay, and leaves him in this suspended state between life and death. And also, as a result of that, vegetation grows from his wounds, sometimes flowers and sometimes trees. So this is all very interesting, but how the heck does it connect back to Silent Hill 2? I'm glad that you asked. I actually suspect in our story that Maria, specifically, is a reincarnation of Cybele, and James is then Attis. And Mary is interpreted as the woman that he falls in love with, or the princess that he desires to marry in the version with Zeus. James shows up in Silent Hill, already seemingly suspended in a state between life and death, purgatory, if you will. He is haunted by sexual imagery that seems to imply that he has struggled, if not with physical infidelity, then the repression of his sexual urges stemming from his inability to be intimate with Mary. He's also followed and guided through this world by Maria, someone born from this world. We know that to be true from the DLC. And she is also someone clearly trying to seduce him throughout this entire narrative. So what if, rather reading this as James's wish to see Mary again, but only in this overtly sexual form, we look at her as an incarnation of one of the old gods of Silent Hill, parading as Mary to try and then seduce James. That means in this interpretation, we are assuming Mary and Maria are two completely different people and not simply different versions of the same person. The horror in Silent Hill gradually increases as James moves through the town, showing both his slow descent into madness and leading up to his confrontation with Pyramid Head. I have speculated before that Pyramid Head might actually be a manifestation not only of James's guilt and desire for punishment, but also castration anxieties. This is because of his overt violence and sexual themes as an antagonist, because he's capturing mannequins, penetrating Maria, and is of course shaped like genitalia. What if because of all these things though, he's not just a representation of castration anxiety, but the means of James to actually be able to castrate himself at the end of this journey of madness, just like in the myth of Cybele and Attis. Once he realizes the truth of what happened to Mary, he states that he doesn't need the two pyramid heads anymore, though he just kind of shouts this at the three figures that are in the room, including Maria, who is tied up and dies once again in that scene. No matter who he's talking to though, he has this struggle and fight with the two pyramid heads, and at the end they actually end up stabbing themselves through the head, and then they produce two eggs for James to use to move on to the next room. Eggs are representative of the reproductive organs that are the female equivalent to testes. So you can see where I'm going with this. This could also be the reason why there are two pyramid heads, which has been speculated since the game has came out, basically, hinting at oriectomy as the means for castration. Now, am I implying that pyramid head is James's balls? Yeah. Then, of course, he confronts Maria, once again impersonating Mary. In her dialogue, she sounds really angry and desperate for James's approval, especially after James fully rejects her. She transforms into the terrifying creature that we end up fighting, and he defeats her. Maybe, though, he never truly did defeat her. After all, Maria reincarnates, I think, at least 2 or 3 times, specifically just in the game alone as part of the narrative. The developers have also said before that there's not one canon ending to Silent Hill, and a popular fan theory, I think probably because of this, is that James is just reliving his time in Silent Hill over and over and over again, replaying through his trauma. This state of limbo is very similar to me to the myth of Attis, where his body is incorruptible, but he cannot come back to life. So he's in this state permanently between life and death. With Maria being read as the god then, she also theoretically could have had the power to cause Mary's illness in the first place, seeing them together in Silent Hill and getting violently jealous. Mary starts coughing in the VHS flashback, after all. There's actually more evidence than just narrative parallels, though. Her appearance in funerary imagery and the widespread use of the name Matar point to her role as a goddess who moved between the boundaries of the living and the dead, or simply between worlds, which seems to be a safe interpretation of the town of Silent Hill. Her iconography was not simply carved in burial art, but it was also carved into a rock spur on Mount Sipylus in Phrygia at the city of Pessinos. This mother goddess was worshipped in a different form, actually, an unshaped black stone believed to have fallen from the sky. I bring up these stones as a symbol of Cybele, the mother goddess, because of the connections to Silent Hill 4, which I personally consider as part of the game's canon. The game references not just mother goddesses, with Walter specifically his entire motivation in the game is to wake up his mother, who he believes to be this room in the apartment complex. But also referenced in this game is a sacred mother stone called Nakihona, who, according to Jasper Gain, this stone was used to communicate with dead ancestors. The problem, you may be saying, is that God hasn't been reborn yet at the time of Silent Hill 2. And that's true, but that doesn't fully debunk this theory. There are other significant divine and angelic figures, including Baltiel, which we know about, the attendant of God, which facilitates rebirth, and then there's also lesser deities that have been born from this god to help aid in their purpose, called, I'm gonna mess this up, Zuchi Labara, which is the red god, and Labsolvith, which is a yellow god. Obviously, my first instinct is to associate the red god with Maria because of the color associations, but there's even more evidence here. If you replay Silent Hill 2 to get the rebirth ending, you'll come across a book that is called Crimson Ceremony. And in this it says, "The beauty of the withering flower and the last struggles of the dying man, they are my blessings. Thou shalt ever call upon me, and all that is me in the place that is silent. O proud fragrance of life which flies towards the heart, and O cup which brims with the whitest of wine, it is in thee that all begins." My interpretation too of the white wine is that that is made from the white Claudia in the town. The Born from a Wish DLC also mentions an acacia tree, which echoes the fir tree that grew from Attis's wounds in one version of the myth. The acacia tree is not a fir tree, but it does symbolize purity, rebirth, eternal life, and mortality. The Crimson Ceremony and these reincarnation symbols might actually bring a really interesting interpretation to the entire story, where it's not Mary being revived, but James. In other words, Mary is a red herring. If this is the case, it would potentially also explain where and why White Claudia grows specifically in Silent Hill. Perhaps it is the vegetation from the wounds and the body that James leaves behind every time he dies. This story would also serve to bring more light to the descent of the Holy Mother, being a minor god that Walter wanted to summon, and strengthening the thread that actually tie Silent Hill 2 and 4, which already had more connections than some of the other games, with 1 and 3 obviously being connected, and 2 and 4 at the very least mentioning similar characters, making it actually a much more tragic story where we see James and Mary being tied up in the schemes of another god, the Red One, the mother, the scorned lover, and a god of Silent Hill.